My first interaction with this show came from walking down into my kitchen one day and hearing audible weeping from my 21-year-old little brother. To the point where I genuinely thought like a friend had died. And it was just him watching the finale of this show. I've not seen the original film, I've not read the book, I have no prior history or relationship with this material and this story, but he insisted that we sit down and watch it. And it basically follows two individuals over the course of about 15 years or so. Each episode takes place over the course of a day, and each episode is also a different year. So it takes place on the same day, but over different years. The absolute selling point of this show is its two lead actors, because without them, there is no show, there is no emotional connection, there is no reason to dip and dive in, because I think the USP of this show is that it's taking place on the same day but over different years, and we're just kind of checking in to these characters for 24 hours each year to see where they're at and see what they're doing. And because of that, you miss out on a lot of the narrative in betweens. You're left to piece things together, like implicitly, they're not directly addressed. Supporting cast, because of this, kind of come and go. There's not really a stable ensemble that are kind of recurring massively throughout, which means you are anchored into this story and this journey by the two leads, and they are both phenomenal. I think without the chemistry they had, without the believability and the rawness, Dexter and Emma would not have felt so alive and would not have felt so relatable. So I think props to the two leads, because without them this show falls apart. I did also love the slow burn of the first 10 episodes or so. I think that it really worked. I think the kind of prolonged, drawn out, stunted nature of their relationship and this kind of platonic will they won't they just really worked, especially because with some of the episodes you are just following one of the characters, and it really just allowed the show to breathe. It didn't feel like it was purely interested in the romantic reconciliation of these two characters. It was very much invested in them as individuals, which then made their connection and their relationship that much stronger. Everyone's been hyping up the soundtrack. Soundtrack was great. I think the cinematography was also really stunning. I loved how well paced it was. Each episode was only 30 minutes or so. And although at times it didn't feel long enough, I do think it also really did. I'm not sure that 14-hour-long episodes would have landed with the same impact. It would have felt slow. It would have felt too deliberately drawn out and stunted. So I think they really hit the sweet spot in terms of the pacing of these episodes. I've got to say, I do take a bit of an issue with the story. That's not the fault of the show, obviously. So spoiler alert if you haven't seen it, but classically, one of them dies. And I was starting to think, okay, one of them probably isn't going to die. Maybe it's going to be more of a La La Land or a past lives situation where it's still very devastating, but at the end they both kind of get their own lives from it, and they both benefit from being each other's soulmates even if they can't be together. And then bam, they decide to kill Emma Morley. You know, the story is what it is. I do think that the show became rushed, particularly between episodes 11 to 13, primarily when Emma and Dex get together, what they've always wanted to say to each other. When that starts to come out and when we start to get a bit of a flavour of their relationship and how they would be together, for me that was just rushed through. And although the half-hour episodes for me had worked up until that point, I definitely think they needed to be longer in those 3 episodes especially. I think the finale landed. I do think the finale landed. But I really wasn't as emotionally invested in episodes 11 to 13 as I think I should have been. Because for me, the kind of 10 episode build up to that was damn near perfect. And then the emotional payoff for me just did not land. Because we just don't get enough of it. Because we're only seeing the same day in their lives on each year, we miss out on big events. So the episode when they finally reconcile and get together like properly, in that episode it's revealed that they've already slept together, they've already been together, they just haven't talked about it. And for me that pulled me out of the emotional like investment in that episode, and that they did get together in that episode, because they'd already done it, we just hadn't seen it. I think the sex scene was entirely forgettable, which makes me question, did it need to be there in the first place? Because it's not actually their first time having sex. So I think partly the emotional catharsis of that moment was ruined by that, knowing it wasn't their first time. But yeah, I also just don't think it was shot or choreographed or edited in a way that felt like a release, like pent up emotions over the course of 15 years or so were flooding out and being released. I think it's very hard in any kind of rom-com or just love story for the payoff of the get together to be as satisfying as the build up. So I found when they eventually got together, I just found it a bit flat because you're not living in it for long enough. You basically get one episode where they're together and they're happy, and then bam, Emma's dead by the end of that. For me, I think this show needed at least 3 episodes of these two characters living their life together. It's like when we got to that, the show then decided that that wasn't interesting enough to sustain it. And that's when, for me, things like the death become more of a gimmick, more of a plot point, just to throw drama into the mix than anything else. We'd spent so long flirting around the idea of them getting together, the time not being right, with them being with different partners at different times, careers being at different points, emotional stability being at different points, and then eventually you get the catharsis that they are together. But the show is unwilling to let you breathe in that moment for long. So for me, while it did stick the landing of the finale, and I thought that was really beautiful and subtle and felt very naturalistic, it felt like the perfect closure for Dex, and was able to get the supporting cast back in a way that didn't feel too forced. I do think the prior 3 episodes needed to do more to make that series flawless. But overall, I really enjoyed it. It felt very human, it felt very honest, and I think that is probably the biggest compliment you can give to a love story. I think the way that it grew from platonic and amicable towards this inevitable true love felt beautiful. Honestly, I thought it was so organic, so incrementally built up, that it's just a shame it felt a little hurried towards the end. What did keep me hooked, I think, was the 2 characters. The fact that you are invested in them as individuals more so than them as a couple. That kept me engaged even when the narrative kind of squanders their growth as a couple. So yeah, I definitely am not raving about it like I think most of the internet is. But I did think it was beautifully made. I thought it was exceptionally performed. I think both of those leads have an incredible future ahead of them. It felt very human and it felt very true, and I don't regret watching it for a second. I thought it was really strong, even if there were a few wasted opportunities towards the end of the show. But do drop a comment below, guys. Let me know your thoughts. Please also consider liking and subscribing to the channel. That's always a huge help for me. And in the meantime, I'll see you for the next vid.